My name's Sophie Pitman, and I'm one of the postdoctoral researchers on the Refashioning the Renaissance project. This ERC-funded 5-year research project has been asking how artisans and members of the lower classes could engage in fashion during the period 1550 to 1650. And in particular, I've been looking at how craftspeople used their skills and innovations to create new fashions and new styles that could be enjoyed across the social spectrum. One thing that I've been particularly interested in is imitative materials that were designed to look like something else, often something that was finer, rarer, or more expensive. In order to investigate these imitation materials and processes, members of the Refashioning the Renaissance team, as well as a guest researcher, Professor Timothy McCall from Villanova University, have met up here at Aalto University to take part in a 3-day workshop. So we started on the first day, and we were interested in trying to create an imitation damask. This recipe is found in a 16th century French recipe book, and it describes using a kind of resist dye technique in order to imitate damask, but instead of weaving the pattern, the writer, the author of the manuscript, suggests that you sew some fabric onto the surface of a textile. So I prepared some woolen samples dyed with weld and dyer's broom, and then together with members of the team, we stitched on pieces of cord and string, as well as shapes in cloth. And he recommends that you do some Moorish or Moresque patterns to imitate real damask. Then we followed his instructions and thrust the yellow dye into a bath of woad. And so you can see that where the cloth and the cord were attached to the textile, the cloth has remained yellow. While we can see how this process might have worked, we didn't really perfect the technique yet. On day 2, we attempted to make clear stones of amber using some turpentine with some cotton. And so what we had to do was heat these turpentines to really melt them down. And we poured these out into molds, and we have let them set. If you hold these stones up to the light, you get a suggestion as to what the cotton might have been for. And the cotton gives the otherwise quite clear turpentine resin some striations and shapes inside that really imitates a real piece of amber. The author of this book of secrets suggests that you might want to use the amber to make little balls or even handles for knives. And we've found in one of the inventories we've been studying on the Refashioning project a knife maker called Bernardino Campi from 1646 who owned some fake amber in his collection. He wasn't using it for knives, but instead he had fake amber as part of a rosary. While we don't know what materials were used either by Bernardino or by the craftsman he bought the fake amber from, it's an intriguing question to wonder whether they were also made of turpentine and cotton. We also tested a recipe from the same book of secrets to make fake leopard fur. And this recipe promised that if you used quicklime and lead and painted it on some white fur, that you could create dark tawny spots that would look like leopard skin. At first, the mixture was a sort of whitish pink, and it dried on in sort of solid clumps and didn't seem to change color at all. However, we turned back to the instructions and saw that the author had told us once it dries, you need to hit the dye stuff with a rod. So somewhat incredulously, I got out a rod and started hitting the textile on the spots that we painted on. And the white crumbly surface of the top started to crumble away, revealing, as promised, a quite beautiful brown color underneath. On the 3rd day, we tested 2 recipes for counterfeit pearls that are said to look natural. The first was from a 1530s German recipe book. It recommends that you find some snails that live in water and that you grind up their shells, combine them with egg whites, and then boil them in linseed oil in order to create a beautiful round pearl. Although the snail shells that we used gave actually quite a brown and dull color. We could imagine that if we were able to source more pearlescent and lustrous snail shells to grind into these pearls, that it would make quite a good fake substitute for a pearl. The other recipe we attempted was from Italian Book of Secrets, and this was using a clay ball, and then once it had been hardened in the oven or from a few days of drying, to apply Armenian bole and egg white to it and use some silver leaf to gild the pearl. After that, using some parchment glue, and this is made from boiling snips of parchment down into a sticky collagen glue, you can dip the gilded ball into the glue pot to give it the sort of final surface treatment. We managed to apply the leaf to the surface of the pearl, but looking and working close up on the balls, none of us were very convinced by our imitations. We thought that they looked far too silver, they didn't have the sort of milky white shine of a real pearl. But then, looking at each other's work across the dye kitchen table, we really became convinced that these pearls worked at a distance. If you spied your neighbor across the street wearing a necklace or brooch made with these silver leaf balls, you might be convinced that instead they had a real pearl item of jewelry. I think what this might suggest to us about imitation is that it's not always supposed to be a deceptive fake, that instead some of these imitative materials, these counterfeits, these material fictions, might have been designed not to fool a buyer, but to give an effect that they valued for a lesser price, or even to give them access to the kinds of materials that were so rare because they were being imported from across the globe that were otherwise unavailable to most Europeans. In fact, in this recipe for counterfeit pearls, it suggests that the fake pearl might look even better than a natural pearl because it could be perfectly round and hard and shiny. And so perhaps those kinds of features could be valued above the source of the material itself. In the early modern period, many of these mimetic materials, these counterfeits and fakes, were enjoyed across the social spectrum. So what we're seeing here is not an example of the lower classes just trying to imitate their superiors, but actually a genuine interest in pushing materials to their limits, of craft experimentation and using materials to gain visual and material effects regardless of their original substance.